A fair share of business exits result in business emergencies, far more than they should. And that's not because of bad luck or bad timing or bad markets. The way I see it, exit strategy is just still treated as something that you think about the minute you're ready to leave finally, or something you rehearse while pitching investors and trying to shake money loose. Half of all business exits, however, are unplanned, triggered by events that nobody saw coming. And that is not a surprising number when nobody was thinking about it properly until the moment arrived. I believe that exit strategy deserves your time and attention throughout the life cycle of your business, not at the end of it. But I want to make it very clear, this episode is not actually about leaving or the exit itself. It's about what your exit strategy reveals about the health of your business right now, and why every leader in the room should care, not just the owner and not just the investor. I am Maartje van Krieken, founder of the Chaos Games Consulting and host of the Business Emergency Room, the podcast for leaders navigating volatility, complexity, and organizational chaos. Every episode, I bring you battle-tested frameworks, honest practitioner conversations, and the kind of straight talk that does not make it into most boardrooms. Whether you're in the middle of a crisis, coming out of one, or smart enough to want to avoid the next one, you are in the right place. Let's get into it. The conventional framing of exit strategy is too narrow on two fronts. Basically, we typically talk about exits or we talk about exit planning. It's typically too focused on around getting your business off the ground and talking about an event that's still light years away and will only happen that way if you indeed have a very successful journey. In between, it happens by the time that somebody needs to exit or wants to exit and realize that they're unable to monetize the value from the business as they thought they could. I really actually like the Exit Planning Institute's definition of exit planning. Their definition is that exit planning builds a business that's transferable through strong human, structural, customer, and social capital. Human, structural, customer, and social capital. That basically just sounds like good business to me, regardless of what your exit horizon might be. I worked in the exit space most of my career as a business emergency room doctor. Exits are truly a very natural source of business emergencies or cause for business emergencies. And that's exits of any kind, right? That's exits where key leaders are leaving and the business falls apart, or whether they're dying. It's failed mergers. It's failed IPOs or other commercialization events. It's failed buyouts, and basically businesses that just continue to decline because they're not sellable. So failed exits, non-exits really. Because I was already operating in that space, I stumbled up on the work of the Exit Planning Institute, and they actually built up an accreditation around this, the CEPA, Certified Exit Planning Accreditation, which I obtained a while ago. And what I really like about that is that they are really teeing up a very structured approach and specifically a shared language around exit planning and exit strategies, which is beneficial because the kind of people that need to play a role in this have very various backgrounds. There's a lot of different subject matter expertise that comes in. And so actually having individuals who just kind of at times might need to fly in the moment on a specific topic, having a shared language means that people can come in and out of the process and be supportive and helpful much quicker. I wanted to bring this up because I will be referring to some of the tools and some of the processes that they have, because they're also very easily accessible and something for you to maybe consider looking at. I want to make it very clear that I am not assuming to just be talking to business owners. Of course, that this is an important subject if you are the direct owner of a business. But I also believe that this is a topic that the C-suite in investor-backed businesses or divisional leaders or board members or basically anyone who's accountable for a large part of an organization needs to think about, because everybody will be part of a transition in some form that is exit-like. Exit strategy is, to me, really the most honest diagnostic tool you have for the health of your business right now. So let's dive into it. The first thing I want to talk to you about, why specifically I want you to think about your exit strategy today, is that this truly is not about when you leave or whether you want to. Thinking about your exit strategy today will mean that you actually have genuine optionality, options open to you the moment. And I'm not really necessarily very worried whether you are more on the sell or attract investment spectrum of exits, or whether you are going to go more towards the scaling with a partner or hand it over to a successor or run it indefinitely. To me, the work around exit strategies is agnostic to what the actual exit will look like. The underlying work truly is identical. The businesses that exit well almost never started planning when the offer arrived, right? Yes, there are some stellar businesses out there, some unicorns that are basically, maybe literally worth their weight in gold, that gets genuinely an amazing offer. But that's not the norm. What's really happened is that that business has built basically transferable value deliberately long before. There's a quote around this from EPI CEO Christopher Snyder that I really like. Basically, he says, exit planning is dynamic and present tense. Integrating exit planning principles into the way you run your business today will improve your business performance in real time. Exit strategy is a multiplier on today's performance. It's not a plan for tomorrow's departure. The next thing that I think is really relevant around exit strategies is that conventional business continuity plans really have a blind spot. Because business continuity plans, you would say, maybe would address some of these things or should some of these things. But basically, conventional business continuity plans address IT recovery, financial controls, maybe scenarios around physical disasters. If you're lucky and you have a good one, you might have some succession planning in there. But it doesn't tend to deal with at least half the unexpected scenarios that I see triggering an exit. Most of them don't address the human and relational threats that actually really destroy most of business value. According to EPI's State of Owner Readiness report, half of all business exits are unplanned and triggered by one of the 5 Ds. So not market conditions, not strategic decisions, and not technology failures. The gap between what a business continuity plan will cover and what actually disrupts the business is where most organizations are most exposed and least prepared. And the exit strategies fill that gap. It's the form of business continuity planning that addresses the real threats and exposes the gap between what you believe or how you believe your business is running today and how resilient it is, to outsider looking in could see the business running, and how transferable the resilience of that business is to another owner, and hence the transferability of the value contained in the business. Let's talk about those 5 Ds, right? The events that typically trigger the majority of exit failures, or not exit failures, that really trigger unplanned exit events. The 5 Ds are death, disability, divorce, disagreement, and distress. And you might think, that sits in the baby boomer, older business owner category. A lot of that. Not entirely true. Let's name it. A 40-year-old has a 1 in 3 chance of experiencing a disability lasting 90 days or more before age 65. 1 in 3 of us in the prime of our career are going to experience and be out of the running for at least 3 months, a quarter, of a year before we're 65. So disability is statistically more likely than death to disrupt a business during a leader's prime years. Businesses that don't have a succession plan lose on average 25 to 50% of their value during an unplanned ownership transition. 25 to 50%. And I think deep down we sort of know that, right? And we're not talking about a succession plan per se because somebody died. How many of us have been in a high functioning business where some of our top talent and top leadership was poached away and disappeared with a relatively short notice period, or bought out their remaining leave, or the fact that whoever the company is that they're moving towards is into enough of a similar space that it really didn't make sense to make them serve out their time. And basically having an unplanned level of ownership transition. 25 to 50% of your value is walking out of the door with that person. Practically, these 5Ds cluster into two types of responses. There is the structural and legal preparation, right, around death and disability, things like buy-sell agreements and key person provisions, succession clarity, insurance. But also day-to-day accountability, right? Is that delegation of authority arranged in a manner that you're not stuck having to wait till somebody on their sick bed or in the midst of severe hospital treatments because of an event is in a good enough shape that they can put some signatures somewhere so that you can keep the business moving. It's surprising how many businesses do not have at the top level delegation of authority in a practical manner organized when somebody is not accessible for a few days. Typically because they've grown so fast that originally they didn't think they'd have to take care of it, and now it's a much bigger operation and it didn't get taken care of, or it's entirely not up to date. Then the second cluster is more in the relational and operational preparation, right? If you are going to try and figure out how to solve a disagreement when the disagreement is already there, that typically is not a recipe for success, right? Distress, elements of divorce. The trajectory there is that you need governance clarity, you need documented decision rights, you need dispute resolution avenues and pre-agreed approaches. You need a business that does not depend on one relationship or one person to a function, right? So this is also more in the human dynamic space. This is where there's difficult conversations that need to be had. And the more you have in place around stuff that's pre-agreed, the easier the difficult conversations become. They'll never become easy conversations, but you can have easier, difficult conversations. So the question is really not which D will hit you. It's which type of preparation you're most behind on right now. And those 5 Ds, I would love to see them back in your business continuity plan, or at least the provisions therefore, if they occur. With most of us, we don't have anything written down in that space, or not enough. The other thing that I see too much around exit strategies is that basically nobody is updating them. One of the most consistent patterns across organizations that I work with is that the exit strategy being socialized with investors and pitched to boards at the start of the life of the company or the business is not the strategy the leadership team actually believes in anymore, now that the business has grown significantly and has been in existence a couple of years or decades. And that's a problem. It's not unreasonable that it shifted because the market shifted and the business changed and the original acquirer landscape looks different and the founder's personal situation evolved, or the interest of those who have equity changed. The problem is that nobody says it out loud, that no longer matches. And I most typically see kind of a divide where there are still significant investors or equity holders who are not active in the day-to-day of the company, who are operating with a mindset that is how the business will exit, right? And that those internally in the business and directly involved in them running the business, where that's no longer the strategy, and usually have actually reasonable alignment amongst each other within the business on what the now more likely or realistic scenario is. The challenge is that usually those two are disconnected. Yeah. And the reason is typically that updating that exit strategy means admitting something uncomfortable, valuation assumptions that no longer hold, growth that maybe is quietly stalled, or investor management tension that has been managed rather than resolved. So typically, this is exactly the scenario why I believe that looking at your business health with an exit lens on is such a useful tool. In this case, the scenario of half the people involved is still the old story, and the people internally are with the new story. And that's never a good thing, because you're not working on the same thing. You're not working after the same goals and interests. And you would make different decisions based on which side of the equation you sit on. Yeah. So instead of the conversation, what happens is that everybody performs aligned with their version of the story, right? Which is two different destinations. So that's just not just strategic misalignment. That's really a vital sign, right? And yeah, you know what that looks like. It's avoided conversations at the top. It's a governance structure that, or in the typical governance structure, there's nobody really incentivized to escalate this, so it doesn't really happen. But I bet that this internal disconnect, or this disconnect between the two stories, has been bleeding value quietly for a while, right? And it will continue to do so if you don't address it. So the cost is not the wrong strategy. It's the compounding damage of the silence around it, the misalignment, the disconnect. So the question to ask in any organization is, where exit is part of the picture, when did you last genuinely update your exit strategy? And if you would go around the various relevant stakeholders, are you on the same page still, more or less, around that? Yeah. And what I'm really interested in is the substance of it, right? Who was in the room when you went through this, so that it's actually based on reality and not a pipe dream. The next thing to touch upon is that what we're really talking about here is that transferability is the diagnostic. Yeah. So this comes back also to the definition of exit planning that EPI carries. It's whether somebody other than the current key people could run it, grow it, or take it somewhere new without the current key people in the room. That question applies equally, basically, to a founder or a divisional leader or a C-suite exec, or even a PE-backed business, right? Or a board member assessing operational health. The four killers, or the four things that make something not transferable, that show up consistently, are key person dependency, value that walks out of the door with one individual. They own the relationship. They're the only one with certain knowledge. They are the charismatic face of the business that everybody comes back for. They're the one that own the IP and the technology and really know all the stuff around it that's not documented, whatever it is. The second killer is the processes that live in people's heads. Undocumented, unrepeatable, untransferable. If your ways of working are in people's heads, and hence are dependent on the people who work those exact ways of working today, that's not transferable. It needs to be the type of processes that create repeatable outcomes in your business if you need to plug in a new player. And yes, people are not like for like, replaceable. But the definition of what quality, repeatable outputs and deliverables to clients and customers should be structured in a manner that it's not dependent on what's in people's heads, right? It should be possible to plug in new players, not replace the whole batch at the same time, but you should be able to plug in new people and have continuity of your business. The next killer is relationships tied to individuals. And that one is an easy one to see and comes back so often. So these are clients or partners or investors who are loyal to a person and not a business. And I think at a small scale, we all find this very recognizable, right? We go back to a certain mom or pop shop, even if the quality is starting to deteriorate over time, or even if we love buying product A from them, we also buy product B from them, whilst product B is potentially better somewhere else, but we've been going to them forever. We all have those kind of relationships, and we all see those kind of relationships. I've learned over the years that we find it much harder to recognize that in big business, this still works the same. I worked for a multinational, right, and with a matrix organization. And if you see how many people who worked on project A in country Z, right, then move over years later to project B in country X, there is so much overlap. If you see ultimately who on the contractor side ends up working into these projects, we choose people that we like. We tend to choose people that we've worked with before. We also stick around in relationship and situations because we like the people there, even if the quality or the performance is not there anymore. And that creates a problem in transferability, because if that individual who is key to that relationship or a group of individuals moves out of a business, then that's a natural point where somebody says, well, I was only staying with them because of the people. So this is time for me to actually make a commercially smarter decision and move on. Relationships that are tied to individuals, and all of them are, but are heavily tied to individuals, are not transferable. And then the fourth killer is governance that works because everyone knows everyone. So the governance in the business cannot remain informal, undocumented, and fragile under scrutiny. It needs to be documented who makes which decisions at which level, who has which authority levels, who needs to technically verify or see work. But again, this comes down to ways of working and controls and balances. Just because you are okay with your senior salespeople signing off on deals, or because this person has been working with you forever, so that one doesn't have to submit their proposals to others to look at because you implicitly trust them, that is not something that's a transferable value in your business. That might, to you, make you feel as if you have repeatable quality performance in your business, or that may be the reason you have repeatable quality performance in your business. That is not a setup that is transferable to whoever is coming in to take over your business. So any of these business continuity risks today, well, they are risks today, right? They're not just an exit planning problem for later. These are things that are actually dysfunctionalities that sort of work today, or you think are working today, but are also really fragile. Because as soon as there is a move in people, or there is significant disruption, it's all sitting somewhere in the virtual space, right? None of this is tangible enough to be transferable. Then let's talk about this a little bit from the investor and board perspective. For organizations with investors and boards or leadership accountability structures, which is, I would hope, all of us, exit readiness really is a governance metric, and it's not just an owner concern. Investors in a scaled business care deeply about whether it can be taken to the next stage if key leaders leave or change or exit. And boards should really be asking transferability questions at every stage review, not just because exit is imminent, but because the answers reveal the health of the operating model. A business that cannot answer these questions cleanly is, for sure, more fragile than it appears on the dashboard. Sophisticated investors and acquirers will find that fragility eventually, right? So even if you do not get asked the question, or if you sit on the other side of the table and say, hey, I'm okay because my board or investors don't govern to that level of detail, that's not necessarily a good thing. Because if you're saying, oh, fortunately, then you probably know that there is, as we talked about earlier, some discrepancy in the version of the story at that level and the version of the story at your level. So the question is whether you service it first on your terms and actually try to work it, or whether they surface if at the time that somebody else is doing the due diligence, right? Or at the time that you are no longer internally or between those vested parties in the business able to sort it out between you. Please consider that your investors and your board and your executive team are really on the same side of this, because it's in everybody's interest that any exit in any shape or form ends well. For some, it's reputational risk. For some, it's big money on the line. Trust me, if everybody gets damaged, everybody, including those who are not in it directly, physically, everybody gets damaged in bad exits. The organizations that exit well are never surprised by what the buyer finds, right? They know where their own skeletons are and know where they might be slightly behind. And basically, the way for me to think about this, if as a board member or as an investor, if I feel that I'm not getting the story, I will ask the question, are you okay if I send in an independent reviewer? I will pay for them. I want somebody to come into the business and do an assessment on what it may be worth today, or assess it against our current valuations or something. And if you get a lot of pushback, I think that's a sign, right? Because we somewhere know this. We somewhere know that we don't want eyes inside because the story we're telling outside, or what story we're telling the world, doesn't stack up to the story we experience every day. So let's take it to 3 questions for every leader. Not exit planning questions. These are organizational health questions. They also happen to be the first questions a buyer or an investor or an incoming leader asks. So, well, yeah, that's precisely the point I'm trying to make today, right? So the 3 questions I think you should ask today. If the 2 or 3 people most critical to this operation were unavailable for 90 days, what breaks first and how quickly? Question 2. Where does the value of what we do actually live? Where is the value generated in this business? Is it in systems and structure, or is it in very specific relationships and individuals? Built in, or is it sitting in the virtual space, the cloud that's in people's head? Question 3. If someone with no prior knowledge of this organization had to make sense of how it runs and what it's worth, what would confuse or concern them most? If someone with no prior knowledge of this organization had to make sense of how it runs and what it's worth, what would confuse or concern them most? Sit with those 3, honestly, because the answers tell you more about your current organizational health than the dashboard really will at this stage. And if you find yourself unable to answer them comfortably, that's not a problem for later. That is information for now to start working on. I have an invitation for you. This is not a sales pitch. This is a genuine invitation. If this episode lands with you and you're sitting with 1 or more of those 3 questions unanswered, there's 2 things you can do today. One is that you can go back to episode 100, which has the vital signs framework, because the transferability killers map directly into several of those 8 signals. So that's a good start for you to start digging a little further to get to some concrete stuff to work on. The second thing is that I would like to invite you to start the conversation that is not being had. Whatever version of the stale exit narrative exists in your organization, I want you to name it in the next leadership conversation. Name that you see a discrepancy to what was kind of the story and what the story probably really is today. That single act of naming it is usually a good trigger for the real work starting. Of course, if you want a structured outside perspective on what your answers to those 3 questions reveal, that's exactly where I operate. So let me know if you want to talk. That's it for now. For now, ciao. That is your discharge papers from the ER for today. If this episode was useful, please share it, subscribe, and leave a review. It will keep this emergency room open for business and makes a big difference for podcasts like mine. I am Maartje van Krieken, and this show is my own from start to finish. Produced by me, polished by the brilliant team at Hivecast. And remember, this ER is always open. Till next time.